county poorhouse system in New York State, and particularly our poorhouse that I was going to say is over on Onondaga Road, that used to be over on Onondaga Road. Now, how many of you remember seeing the old stone building over on Onondaga Road? Okay, and you know that the brick building is there now. The only part of it that's still left and is being used by the college. It's really wonderful to have it come alive like that again. On November 10th, 1831, an 8-year-old girl named Dorlasky Wilkinson was admitted to the county poorhouse on Onondaga Hill. Just imagine if you were an 8-year-old girl. Your whole life's been turned upside down, and now she's been brought to this cold, forbidding-looking stone building, the poorhouse. She'd heard people talk about the poorhouse, but it wasn't a place she'd ever dreamed of being. Who would care for her here? Oh, there it is. Okay. I did it. All right. Well, anyway, we're just going to talk. Okay. They say husbands aren't that important.
I'm not the husband.
He couldn't come tonight.
Okay, thank you.
1 month later, on December 1st, 1831, the poorhouse charged the town of Camillus $1.65.
Chuck's not here, can you tell?
That's fine. Charged the town of Camillus $1.65 for a pair of shoes and a couple of yards of plaid cloth from which a dress was to be made for Dorlasky. Also in December, there were charges for shirting and thread, 22 cents and 10 cents. And the entry on January 19th reads, "On trial at Obadiah Williams in Manlius." Well, she was out of the poorhouse, but was it better or was it worse? Was she put to work out in the kitchen or out on the farm? How long was she there? We don't know the answer to all those questions, but I did find that a sister, Betsy, age 11, and a brother, Leonard, age 6, came into the poorhouse at the same time in 1831. There was no mention of a mother or a father. I also found Dorlaska, it was spelled just a little differently, Wilkinson in the 1850 census, age 27. This is the right age for our Dorlasky, and her address was once again the poorhouse. With her in this census were her daughters, Harriet, age 7, and Elizabeth, age 1. This is one of the many stories that I ferreted out of the 205 ledgers that are now in my office at Town Hall. This one? By 1875, the State Board of Charities had passed a law prohibiting admission of children under age 5, over age 3 or under 16 to the poorhouse unless they were insane, epileptic, or otherwise unfit for family care. Children were instead then sent to orphanage asylums or placed with what we now call foster families. New York State's first publicly supported institution for dependent people was opened in New York City in 1736. It was called the House of Correction, Workhouse, and Poorhouse. It housed the poor who refused to work, the poor who were unable to work, and the poor who were willing but unable to find work. Following the opening of this institution, more poorhouses were opened throughout the province. A poor law enacted in 1773 was the last and most comprehensive colonial New York poor law. It still relied on removal from the town of non-resident poor, as in previous poor laws, and parents and grandparents of dependents were required to provide as much of their support as possible. The first state poor law, passed in 1784, increased local responsibility. Another law in 1788 made each town or city responsible for its poor, and all towns and cities were authorized to build almshouses if desired. The poor could apply for relief to the overseers, who for the first time were required to register all applicants for poor relief, and the overseers could place children in indentureships or apprenticeships. A law of 1824 authorized counties to establish poorhouses. County supervisors were to appoint superintendents to run these poorhouses, and town overseers could send paupers applying for relief to the county poorhouse, and could also send beggars under age 15 to be instructed in labor until they could be self-supporting. The poorhouse superintendent could direct inmates to work to cover the cost of their support. Just after I began cataloging the Onondaga County poorhouse ledgers, I received a telephone call one evening. A woman introduced herself to me, and I told her and she told me that she was in Florida with her ailing elderly mother, who had just told her that she had been adopted and had been born in the Onondaga County poorhouse. She began a search for her birth record that brought her to me. Her adoptive mother told her that her birth date was correct and that she thought her birth name had been Patricia. She told me her birth date was May 14th, 1933, and then she gave me her address in Florida, and I told her I'd check the books and let her know as soon as I could find out anything. The next morning, I was over at Town Hall, found the ledger titled Record of Births, December 1927 to December 1937, and the only birth on May 14th, 1933 was for a female child named Patricia Ann Bennett. Then I went to the ledger for 1933 and located the admission record for her mother, Elodie Bennett. Elodie was an 18-year-old nursemaid with a high school education, born in Oxford, Pennsylvania, moved to New York State with her family in 1926. Elodie's mother was Catherine Simons Bennett. Her father was Leroy Bennett. The sister who accompanied Elodie at the time of her admission was Ethel Bennett, and they lived at 15 Frederick Street in East Syracuse, New York. This was the first time I'd researched these books, and I couldn't believe that all this stuff was in there. I lugged those heavy ledgers up the stairs, made Xerox copies, and put them in the mail. That evening, we were having dinner. The phone rang. I had another call from Florida. I told her I'd found all the information, made the copies, and that it was in the mail, and she'd probably have it tomorrow. But her reply to me was, "I can't wait. Tell me who I am." I've had other inquiries since then, but I don't remember any of them as well as that one. Where am I? I don't know whether that's where I'm supposed to be. Let's see how it's, yes. Okay, the page titled Man List tells us that on January 7th, 1832, Betsy Hauser, age 34, was admitted to the poorhouse with her 6 children. There's a separate admission record for each child. Shortly after that, her eldest daughter, Emmeline, 13 years old, was sent on trial to James Cook, Skadialis. Daughter Catherine, 10, was sent to Stewart Field, Onondaga. Son William, 11, spent a little over a week at the poorhouse, and then he was sent on trial at the Onondaga Hill Farm of Rufus Cossack. 12 weeks and 6 days later, Betsy Hauser was discharged with her 6-year-old daughter Margaret and 5-year-old son Charles. This came shortly after the April 2nd death of her year-old daughter Mary. We wonder, where was Betsy's husband? Did he die and leave Betsy unable to provide for the family? Were the mother and baby Mary ill when they arrived? Did Emmeline and Catherine and William rejoin their mother, or were they bound out until they reached legal age? Probably. It would need a lot of research to discover the whole story. Sometimes they simply wanted a warm place for the winter. As we see in an article in the Syracuse Journal, November 20th, 1861, which was titled, "Going the Rounds." It says, "There are some paupers who go the rounds of the poorhouses through the state, working on farms, canal boats, or otherwise during the summer, and bringing up in the public almshouses of the county where they may chance to be when winter sets in. It is a matter of some difficulty to guard against the impositions of these professional vagabonds. One of this class recently made application for admittance to the Troy House of Industry, and on being questioned, admitted that within a few years, he had been an inmate of no less than 37 poorhouses. They must have fed him well. For the budget year of 1914, it should be number 6. Oh, that's 8. Here it is.
It says 6.
Yes.
Okay, there you go. For the budget year of 1914, the county paid total wages of $25,593.19. That's total wages to a staff which included a doctor, nurses, cooks, ward helpers, seamstresses, laundresses, and waitresses. Monthly pay in 1915 for teamster John Oxner was $30. For kitchen helper Augusta Richards, it was $15. In January of that year, County Home Superintendent Elmer Van Benthuizen received $166.67. His wife Hattie received $41.69 for her work as matron. Here in this payroll ledger, a genealogist would go crazy. An 1877 record shows causes of dependency of 362 persons at the Onondaga County Poorhouse as follows: vagrancy 127, intemperance 64, indigent and destitute 53, lunacy 42, sickness 30, debauchery 13, old age 10, bastardy 7, lameness 6, idiocy 6, and blindness 4. Deaths and burials of inmates seem to have been handled in different ways at different times. Early on, the poorhouse buried their dead in a graveyard that was to the side of the original building and behind where the hospital was built, or would be built in 1900. At some point, burials were moved to an area further back behind the poorhouse complex and what has been called Poorhouse Knoll or Bunker Hill. During epidemics, we know they were buried there in mass graves. We did find these 6 gravestones out on the knoll and an entry in one of the ledgers noting that money had been given by a friend to be used for headstones. These are the only headstones on any of the paupers' graves. And that graveyard is still out there behind the building. An awful lot of the topography has been changed, but that is still there. There's also a 1-acre plot called Willow Grove over behind the Walnut Grove Cemetery on Onondaga Hill. That was a county burial ground for some years before the county bought the property on Howlett Hill for the present Loomis Hill Cemetery. By 1896, continuing through 1973, the deaths are listed in 4 separate ledgers. This page shows several dead bodies were picked up by the Syracuse Medical College. Pasted inside the back cover is the state law which says, in essence, that corpses not claimed by relatives or friends within 24 hours after notice of death were to be sent to the nearest medical college for the purpose of teaching medicine, anatomy, or surgery. And also on the inside front cover is a letter to William G. Broad, keeper of the Onondaga poorhouse, stating that the College of Medicine at Syracuse University wishes to avail itself of this law, and that Mr. Broad will keep proper records and notify them when deaths occur. Another particularly interesting ledger is titled Register of Pauper Indians in the Onondaga County Poorhouse from 1895. That's right. From 1895 to 1920. I've decided that probably the reason for keeping these charges in a separate ledger was because the charges for each inmate were billed to the appropriate municipality, and I think probably the charges for the Native Americans were billed directly to either the state or the federal government, not to local municipalities. The first entry was on January 12, 1895, for Nancy Hill, age 30, and her 5 children, age 12, 10, 8, 4, and 2. The family stayed at the poorhouse until July 12, 1895, when it is noted that Nancy recovered and returned to the Onondaga Reservation. However, the 5 children were transferred to the Thomas Asylum for Indian Children. I had no idea what the Thomas Asylum was, but I kept it in the back of my head. And sometime later, I found several pages in a report that told me that the Thomas Asylum for Orphan and Destitute Indian Children was incorporated in 1855 as a private institution. The asylum was located within the Cattaraugus Indian Reservation in Erie County and was charged to receive destitute and orphaned children from all Indian reservations in the state. It was named for Philip E. Thomas, a benefactor of New York's Indians and an early financial backer of the asylum. In 1875, ownership of the asylum was transferred to the state of New York. Its emphasis was now on education rather than simply as a residence, and the name was changed in 1905 to the Thomas Indian School, which operated until 1957. This information is contained in a finding aid for the State Board of Charities files sent to me by the New York State Archives. The stories related today are among thousands contained in a truckload of ledgers transferred to the town of Onondaga historian by the Van Dyne Home and Hospital. These records have been carefully housed in the basement of the present county hospital, but the hospital's records are now automated, and like most businesses, they needed the storage space. I was extremely pleased to become the caretaker of this treasure trove. The ledgers are now housed in my office at the town hall on Onondaga Hill and are available for research. We have people coming in from all over to research those. Another one of our treasures is the original handwritten specifications for the first limestone building. In 1817, Onondaga voted to raise $500 to build a facility to house the county's indigent and chronically ill. Up to that point, their care had been relegated to private homes at municipal expense. In fact, there was a time when debtors were auctioned off to the highest bidder, sort of like slave auctions in the South. Perhaps it was public antipathy to this practice, as well as the rising cost of caring for the poor in individual homes, that prompted the County Board of Supervisors in 1827 to purchase a 145-acre farm on Onondaga Hill for $18 an acre. The original 2-story limestone structure, which one? This one? Okay, I'll try to remember. The original 2-story limestone structure, a barn, cowhouse, and backhouse, were completed December 18, 1827, at a final cost of $2,825. I didn't find any mention of how many people they thought it would serve. They just thought it was a nice big house and would take care of a lot of people. They had no idea how fast the population of the poorhouse would grow. The early sketches and photos all show the original building as 3 stories high. However, for the first 41 years, it was a 2-story building. A 3rd story and a wing were added in 1868. This photo shows the first 4 stone buildings. The building second from the left was the first building, erected in 1827. And then in 1854, a second stone building was erected to the left of that first building. The 3rd and 4th stone buildings were erected in 1869 and 68. I'm pushing it, but nothing happens. Oh, it's a box. Gosh. When you do it right, it's amazing. In 1915, the yellow brick building was added at the end of the row. You can see it down there. See if I can do it. There you go. Uh-oh. Forget it. In 1930, the middle, oh, it's going like crazy again, isn't it, Linda? I'm sorry. Oh, dear.
You want one of these chairs, Linda?
Yeah, I would. Okay.
Come on
We
over
want to go
here.
back to number
Linda?
7.
Okay. And you can see too. Where do you want to be?
710. Oh, I don't know which number. There you go. Did we do that?
That's before that.
Did we do that? Okay. All right. 710.
Thank you. Come on over here.
Okay. Okay, now the next one. We have to go to the middle.
Oh, now.
Yeah. Okay. This is the same group of 5 buildings, but you see the carpenter shop and the large stack. Next. In 1930, the 3 middle stone buildings were torn down, and the red brick men's building now joins the 1854 limestone building to the yellow brick building on the other end. In 1827, when the Onondaga County Poorhouse was established as a residence for the destitute, the homeless, or those without families to care for them, medical and nursing care were not contemplated. It was almost a half century before hospitals became available in the community. The first county hospital or infirmary was built in 1900 to the east of that original limestone poorhouse building, and the more seriously ill were segregated there. I was interested to find newspaper articles stating that the famed Archimedes Russell was the architect for this first county hospital building. $10,000 was appropriated. Now you see, the dollars are getting up there. We paid what, $2,000 or something for a whole mass of buildings in the beginning. Now here we are spending $10,000 for one building, with stone suitable for the buildings to be quarried on the county farm using inmate labor. In 1916, the tuberculosis sanatorium was completed nearby, and the patients who were ill with tuberculosis were transferred there. Before that, a tented canopy outside the county hospital was used to give the TB patients sun and air. Next. This photo was probably taken of somebody's pet cat, but the background is what I wanted. The background is another view of that first hospital building taken in the early 1920s. And then this is the hospital again, circa 1922, showing a matured landscape, and perhaps you can see the lady in the white dress on the steps. A close view shows a white cap. She was probably a nurse. It might be interesting to think about what the early superintendents of the poorhouse must have had to face. Onondaga County was a heavily infested malaria region. Smallpox, measles, typhoid fever, and tuberculosis were prevalent. The war between the states took many providers away from their families, and provisions for dependents in those days were poorly organized. The old Pogie Pond provided the water supply for the home and the barn, and it's likely it wasn't fenced off from the pasture land. It was but a short time before that first hospital building was filled to overflowing. In 1928, a new, well-constructed, and they called it relatively fireproof, building was constructed next to the old building. You can see the old hospital on the right of the picture, and this new building had beds for 200 patients. This photo shows the hospital as it looks today. The addition on the far right was added about 1954, and that's the building that's still there today. This is the side or main entrance to that hospital building. It is, oh, okay, I'm saying that this is the building that is now being renovated and is being used by OCC for off-campus classes from associated colleges. The next photo is the women's building. The cornerstone laying is noted in a June 12, 1908 newspaper. I thought that was a very interesting looking building with its turrets and wings, and for some reason it was torn down in 1968. 60 years just doesn't seem very long for a building. You know, the life of a building like that. It was an expensive building. I don't know why they tore it down. The TOHS files have snapshots of these trees being planted by relatives of the Hauser family from Onondaga Hill. All that remains today is the double line of beautiful trees bordering the path to the former front door. It's kind of funny when you drive by there. If any of you have driven by in the last few months, there are two different alleys of trees. They just go down across the yards there and don't go anywhere. They're just there. Next, Lindy. This was called the Nurses Building. It's on the corner of Velasco Road. The county used it for offices until recently, and now it's being rehabbed as another building for the college. The superintendent of the poorhouse made an annual report to the supervisors of the county. In November 1829, 2 years since they'd opened their doors, they reported that there had been 45 paupers in the poorhouse at the time of the last annual report. In the year since, they had received 226 for a total of 271. 155 have been discharged, 21 have absconded, 2 have leave of absence, 10 children are out on trial, 11 girls and boys have been bound out to good places, and 21 have died. And there was an explanation after this notation which said, some of whom were very, look at that, V-E-R-R-Y, they were very aged and infirm, and others brought their laboring under malignant diseases. 51 still remain on hand. Since they opened 2 years ago, they've had to take on a hired man, and the record justifies this by saying, it might be proper here to remark, very little reliance could be placed on the inmates for assistance, particularly the men, as most of them came sick or lame, and when sufficiently recovered to be able to help, they've been discharged. Now, as you'll see, somebody was working around there, and they had only one hired man. During the past year, they had put out an orchard of 70 apple trees, 35 rods of stone wall, and 75 rods of new rail fence. They seem to have kept everybody busy. The reported produce taken from the farm for the last year included, here you go, wheat, corn, barley, potatoes, beans. They also had 16 hogs and 2 cows. The average weekly cost for keeping paupers in that year of 1829 was 88.5 cents. Imagine, 88.5 cents a week. Not a day, not a meal, but a week. Okay, an 1828 inventory of furniture on hand at the Onondaga County Poorhouse tells us a lot about the way these folks lived. Remember, this was back in that first stone building, and it was the second year of its existence. There were 3 pine tables and 1 cherry table, 7 benches and 31 chairs, 33 bedsteads and bed cords, 41 straw beds, and 4 feather beds. Makes you wonder who got the feather beds. Also, there seemed to be enough blankets, quilts, comforters to have a couple for each bed. And for the inner man, there were 29 testaments, 1 Bible, and 6 spelling books. All kinds of tubs, pails, pots, barrels, kettles, and cleaning utensils, and 2 cradles were listed next to 2 large wheels and 1 foot wheel. Can't you see the ladies up there in the spinning room minding the babies and the cradles next to them? And there was the equipment necessary to feed all people. Milk pans and pails, 6 baking pans, 2 coffee pots, 6 pepper boxes. I thought that was interesting. 2 coffee pots, but 6 pepper boxes. 1 coffee mill. For the workmen, there was an adze and auger, jointer's plane jacks, hammers, hatchets, wedges, and of course the shoe hammer, shoe knives, tacks, and lasts to repair or perhaps make their own shoes. As was the case in most poorhouses, the inmates worked for their keep unless they were physically unable. This picture shows the county poorhouse buildings in the background, the keeper's house in the center, and the inmates working in the farm fields. Here are the hay fields, and the farm buildings, the men on the hay wagon, the cows, and the pigs. The ice was cut on Pogie Pond, which was the water source for the poorhouse and for the city of Syracuse. Caption on the back of this photo read, "Mike Ryan delivering ice from Pogie Pond to the hospital." This was a familiar sight, the men sitting in the sun outside the carpenter's shop. And these are some of the children who lived at the poorhouse. And this photo is titled Maggie. Next one. She lived at the county home. The head nurse, Miss Driscoll, at Pogie Pond. Men shoveling snow. William Broad, one of the early supervisors of the poorhouse. And we have Broad Road. This early snapshot shows construction of buildings in the complex. And this was part of the powerhouse. Look at those funny old trucks. And this is a close-up of those same buildings with a large stack in the background. And here are the powerhouse, the roundhouse, barns, the stone buildings and yellow brick building in the background. And they tell me that that round building here in the front, if they went into it, they could go down some steps, and there were tunnels to each of the buildings so they could get to those buildings from outside. It never was there when I was there. Okay. In the 1940s, a cannery building was built behind the women's building, so they were still farming, cooking, and canning their own foods up through World War II, up until at least the 1950s. 356. Okay, this is the cannery building as it looked just before it was torn down in 1998. The New York City Lunatic Asylum on Blackwell's Island was the first municipal mental hospital in the United States, founded in 1834. The State Hospital for the Insane at Utica was established in 1842. The first references to the insane that I found in the Onondaga County Poorhouse are in the very first ledgers in the column asking for cause of dependency, where they noted lunacy. Page 300 of the 1874-1889 ledger is entitled Insane, I-N-S-A-Y-N-E, discharged and died in 1876 and 1877. A newspaper article refers to the 1863 stone buildings as the New Insane Asylum, 32 by 76, 3 stories high. Before that, the insane were kept with the other inmates, or the worst cases were interred in the cells in the basement. And some of those cells were still there when the buildings were torn down a few years ago. An 1897 newspaper article tells of an unannounced visit by an enterprising reporter who found a dungeon or cellar in which an insane man was found, and I quote from his article, "Stark naked, his shrunken cheeks, hollow eyes, sunk deep in their sockets, and his emaciated, feeble form told of the shameful and degrading treatment this poor, helpless human being had been subject to in being immersed in a dark, loathsome, and filthy dungeon. Well, if you've read many newspapers from this period, you know that they tended to be a bit elaborate and wordy, but we can only hope that that poor fellow wasn't quite as bad off as this would appear. However, articles later do tell of poorhouse reforms, and a change was made in the keeper. Another clue to the changing social mores is the change of the name from County Poorhouse in 1827 to the kinder Onondaga Home and Hospital in 1861. However, the ledger in the years 1889-91 is still labeled Onondaga County House and Insane Asylum. Then in 1954, it was renamed Van Dyne Home and Hospital in honor of a distinguished family of physicians who served the Syracuse area for almost a century, and they were very active at the poorhouse. In 1959, the county took over the previous state tuberculosis sanatorium complex off West Seneca Turnpike, a few miles from that original poorhouse complex. And in 1975, the new Van Dyne Home and Hospital buildings were built. All of the original buildings in the complex, except the Red Brick Hospital building, were torn down in 1998. The name poorhouse has always had an unhappy connotation. People had been accustomed to personally caring for their old and sick, felt a sense of shame if it became necessary to abandon them to someone else's care. As well, the folks who entered the poorhouse system often felt shamed and abandoned. When I came across this picture, it reminded me of a poem I found. Will Carrollton's poem called Over the Hill to the Poorhouse was published in 1927 and runs in part as follows. I'm going to read it to you because it really is kind of neat, but it's... Anyway, over the hill to the poorhouse, I'm trudging my weary way. I'm a woman of 70, only a trifle gray. Over the hill to the poorhouse, I can't quite make it clear. Over the hill to the poorhouse, it seems so hard and queer. What is the use of heaping on me a pauper's shame? Am I lazy or crazy? Am I blind or lame? For I can earn my victuals, and more too I'll be bound, if anybody is only willing to have me around. There are 2 more pages, and then it ends with, so they have shirked and slighted me and shifted me about. So they have well-nigh soured me and wore my old heart out. But still, I've borne up pretty well and wasn't much put down till Charlie went to the poor master, put me on the town. Over the hill to the poorhouse, my children dear, goodbye. Many a night I've watched you when only God was nigh. And God will judge between us, but I will always pray that you shall never suffer the half I do today. People don't talk much about the poorhouse today. I grew up with 4 sisters, and one of my dad's favorite lines was, "You girls will drive me to the poorhouse." You've probably heard the saying. We didn't. Do you have any questions? No. Yes?
How'd they raise the money from the early days? Was it taxes even?
Oh yeah, it was the county, and it was county taxes. But as you saw from the salaries, it didn't cost an awful lot to keep it going. When? Oh, probably 3 or 4, oh gosh, maybe more than that, maybe 5 years ago. They're all over, over to the, on the other building, over the big white building that looks down over the valley. And it's pretty nice. It is, it's a lovely place. If you have time, you should go up and visit it because, the people up there love to have company, and it's their home, so you're welcome to go up and visit. I have gone up and chatted with someone, and you get to meet the nicest people. Oh yes, And of course, this is the way the building looks today. That's there are only the two buildings left, the one over on the corner that they're, as I said, they're making it into the nurse's home, and then this building. And it is lovely now. The way they put the lights on it at night, it's so pretty when you drive by. It's hard to believe it's the same old building.
I live in 9, and I've been there 10 years, like 9 years now, but when I started 9 years ago, there were people that worked there that told me their parents were in the poorhouse. Or not, maybe not their grandparents, but the children grew up and they all worked, and a lot of them on the living family.
Well, you know, it's an important part of the hill. A lot of the people. I mean, at one point, someone told me there was as many as 50% of the people who lived on the hill worked at poorhouse or the hospital, one of the buildings over there. It was a big employer at one time.
Always plenty to eat.
Yes, yeah, nice kitchen.
In the early days, it looks like they sent a lot of the kids out to work, but it also mentioned that they were going to train them. So were there teachers listed too in the employees? Or?
No. There were some school books, and someone told me that, and I have no idea, but they said that the nurses, if they had time, would go through the school books with the kids, or the mothers who were there used the school books, but there were very few of them. Very few. And usually the kids only stayed because they were sick too or hadn't been fed very well, and until they got good and healthy, and then they'd send them out to work someplace. Yeah, and a lot of them actually went into good homes and were adopted by the families that they moved in with. So there was a happy outcome for a lot of them too. It wasn't all sadness.